Hello, guys. Welcome to the show. I hope everyone is doing just fine. And I hope this 2024 is going according to plan. And whatever you are trying to achieve, whatever you are working towards, you are really giving in your best. And everything, hopefully, will turn out just the way you wanted. So, let's run through some major stories making the headlines in continental Africa. Vatican's blessings to same sex union not appropriate, say African bishops. The declaration by the Pope on same sex blessings in the Catholic Church is causing a lot of confusion. And many of the Catholic Christians in Africa do not find this statement favorable or do not appreciate such a thing. And they are staging a coup, or better still, a mutiny. So the bishops are saying that what the Holy Father said or what the Vatican is saying is not welcome, and they won't follow that order. So let's get further into the story to really understand what this whole thing is all about. African bishops on Thursday expressed displeasure against the Vatican's recent decision to bless same sex couples and said that it was not appropriate in Africa because it was contradictory to the cultural ethos of African communities. Yeah, that's so convenient for them to say. Yeah, it's against the African culture, it's against African traditions, it's against African norms. Yeah, so convenient. But let's continue. In many conservative religious African countries, homosexuality is still illegal. In many countries, there is a history of stigma and repression associated with homosexuality. The Catholic Church last month allowed priests to bless irregular and same sex couples under some circumstances. The conservative quarters saw this decision as backtracking on gay marriage and homosexuality, which the church still opposes. You have to remember that all this fussle, all this quarreling, all this back and forth talking is just on something that the Pope said. And it's not like the Pope is endorsing same sex activities. It's not like Pope Francis was like, I support the actions of same sex people. No, he's just like, listen, let's bless these people. If they want to be blessed, of course, let's do the godly thing of blessing them. Let's pray for them. Let's hope that they turn away from quote unquote bad behavior. If you have a family member, if you have a friend who was indulging in things that you find uncomfortable with, to things that you believe are sins, right? You wouldn't just cast them out. As a godly person, as a child of God, what you do is you try to bring them closer, you try to educate them, you try to give them more information, and most importantly, you will try to pray for them so that your God might change their lives. That is what you do. But it's quite shocking for me to see the way Catholic Christians and their bishops and their priests have taken this message in Africa. Isn't it a godly thing for you to pray for someone whom you think has fallen short on certain moral principles? Isn't it your responsibility as a child of God to make sure that your neighbor doesn't go to hell by praying for them? If you have a way of interceding for someone whom you think is doomed for hell, won't you do that? If a same-sex couple comes to you and said, Reverend Father, or His Holiness the Pope, or His Lordship the Bishop, whatever they call it in the Catholic Church, please bless us. Won't you do that? Won't you do that? Aren't you supposed to have compassion for other people? Aren't you supposed to be sympathetic towards other people? I'm just asking all this because I think that Christians pick and choose. They pick what they think is good for them, and they just discard what they think is not good for them. Anything that brings to them the least discomfort, they just toss it aside. That is what they do. But let's continue further with this article. The initial document from the church had said that same-sex couples, divorcees, and unmarried couples could be blessed in non-ritualized contexts and not in relation to weddings or civil unions. The African countries that saw opposition to the church's move include Malawi, Nigeria, Zambia, Democratic Republic of Congo, among others. A lot of African countries are not taking this line low, and I would hope that their preachers, their reverend fathers, their bishops educate them more on exactly what the Pope said. Because sometimes I feel like even the bishops are taking this thing out of context. And if even they themselves, I mean the bishops and the reverend father, couldn't understand what the Pope said or what the Pope was saying, what is to be expected from common people? What is to be expected from the ordinary masses? But you know what? Let's move on to the second story of the day. South Africa will be suing the United States for its support and complicity in the Palestinian genocide. South Africa has decided to go after the United States for what they have been doing, for their support they have provided to Israel, and how Israel has used that support to commit a lot of human rights violations in Gaza. I have to say this as someone from Africa who initially had a lot of respect for international laws and international rules and regulations, and also believe in multilateralism and also in Western civilized nations. I really thought that the European countries or United States of America was a country that people could really depend on, that could really set the record straight, that did what was correct and just. But as I grow older and as I get more involved into global politics and I try to understand what is really going on around the world, I have come to realize that the United States doesn't do anything which does not benefit them. That even though they proud themselves as the champion of democracy and freedom and human rights and all these nice things, they just say it, but what they do is totally different. They are like the worst hypocrites on earth because they say something and they do totally another thing. They have been bullying the rest of the world. And even though they pretend and they will tell you that The countries around the world are independent and they make their decisions by themselves. And one would think that is the case, but it's not. Behind the scenes, they have been committing a lot of atrocities. Case in point, Bush's war in Iraq and Afghanistan, and how many people died in that war. And no one has ever asked Bush any single question, right? Because remember, the pretext that they used to invade Iraq was later found out to be a false one. The whole thing of WMDs was just a made up story so that they can go in and destroy the country. They re-echo it again and again. They use their media to paint Saddam Hussein and his regime. And let me be clear, Saddam Hussein was not a saint. He was a terrible person. Let me be clear about this. He wasn't a great person at all. He did a lot of terrible things like most other leaders in the Middle East and in Africa. They all have their skeletons in their closets. But the reason for invading Iraq, the reason that Bush told us why he was invading Iraq was all a lie. And it has been proven that they knew it was all a lie, but they went in anyway. And no one has ever questioned George Bush. And I said in the previous video, and I will say it again. Can you even begin to imagine? Can you even wrap your head around if Bush was an African leader and did all those things he did in Iraq and Afghanistan? Can you even begin to imagine where that leader, Bush, would have been by now? Had he come from an African country? Would he still be a free person or not? So let that sink in for a second. Let that sink in for a second. And I like the approach taken by the South African government to support the Palestinians. Because like I have said before, and I will say it again, Israel is committing a lot of atrocities in Gaza. Israel is punishing the people in Gaza. Israel is indiscriminately killing Gazians. And someone had to say something. Someone has to defend the Palestinians. Someone needed to do something, and South Africa is doing just the right thing. So I hope many other African countries can be proactive, can put themselves out there, because more too often we talk about Africa having their seat on the international table, that Africa being able to sit on the table like Europe and America and decide things for the world. That can only happen if African countries put themselves in positions that give them enough power, enough confidence, and enough respect. And that is exactly what South Africa is doing. So kudos to them. And I hope and I pray that the judges at the ICJ look into this matter and consider humanity or put humanity first. But let's move on to our next story for today. Rwanda is making a lot of progress in the EV sector or e-motorcycle sector. And I think that this is going to be something for the future. And Africa should really be investing in EVs or e-motorcycle or anything E. And also, let me just make this one small thing before we continue. I will hope that we, the Africans, do not push this whole idea of going green against our own interests. That if we are going to go green, it should be for our interest and for our benefit. because the Westerners are pushing this whole green revolution, green this, green that on us. And before we start accepting it, before we take them, before we put these policies in place, we should make sure that the policies are beneficiary to us. We should ensure that these policies benefited us the most before we put them into practice. But let's continue. The East African country seeks to become a beacon for the continent's eco friendly initiative. Leading the charge is Rwanda startup Ampesan. The company unveiled plans to roll out 600,000 electric motorbikes in Kigali, which will be the primary launch site. Nairobi, Kenya, and Kampala, Uganda will be next on their list. The Startups General Council explained how it has invested resources to be competitive in crucial stages of manufacturing. There is millions of petrol bikes on the road. Our aim is to ensure that in a few years, we only have electric bikes on the road. We have invested heavily in certain developments. We are still investing in, for example, software. We have our own Amper ropes, which helps in managing swap stations, batteries, and this is giving moral confidence in our products. Yeah, I think it's a very important thing, and I love the whole idea because the whole manufacturing will be set up in Africa. And I think that for Africa to be able to move forward, for Africa to be able to become a developed continent, we must pay more emphasis on manufacturing. It's long overdue where we just export raw minerals and then import finished products. Manufacturing is a very important component to development because it creates jobs and the people need jobs. Manufacturing also empower the private sector, and for any economy to be really that vibrant, it needs a vibrant private sector. Manufacturing in Africa is something that we all must go for. I cannot overemphasize this. So kudos to Rwanda for making the country friendly enough so that people can start doing things. People can start manufacturing in the country. Because remember, it is not just about manufacturing. It is also about having a friendly environment for that to take place. And in order to have companies, business, manufacturing plants set up in your own particular country, the country must be first safe enough for people to do business. The country must have access to basic things that those businesses will need to carry out their daily functions. The country must have a good tax system. And I think Paul Kagame has done a lot in making sure that investors feel way more safe in Rwanda. So kudos to them.